Just had this character of this little fat kid that was a little bigoted jerk, you know, and it made us laugh. Yeah, and he became Cartman.
Is Eric Cartman a sympathetic character? Yes. Now, is he an empathetic one? That requires some conjecture. Eric Cartman is without a shadow of a doubt the most prolific character of South Park. While the main focus, one could argue, is on Stan and Kyle, Cartman is the character who stole the show. After 25 years of being on the air, several specials, a movie, and 2 video games, what if I presented with you the argument that Eric Cartman is a victim of circumstance? If you are anything like me, you have more than likely watched South Park through reruns and in a non-linear fashion. So what is the catalyst leading up to the persona we see today? Let's start at Season 1. Season 1, Episode 1, Cartman gets an anal probe. Cartman gets an anal probe starts off with the boys heading to school and Ike deciding to follow Kyle. First introductions are a great way of setting up group dynamics between the characters of a show. Kyle says to Ike that he cannot come, and Cartman calls him a little dildo in return. Within the first 2 minutes, while we see that Cartman is disrespectful, Kyle is the aggressor in most cases and tends to proceed with physical violence. Yet when Kenny says something probably equally, if not more disrespectful, Kyle slaps Cartman with Ike. Keep these things in mind. Cartman describes being kidnapped and probed by aliens in great detail and doesn't believe it due to his mom telling him that it was all a dream. Chef arrives and details that this was real and Cartman still denies it. Despite Kyle throwing his brother and assaulting him, he only seems to care for his well-being when he's kidnapped. Kyle doesn't want to help Ike out of familial bonds, but more so just because he'll get in trouble if he doesn't help. Cartman begins to shoot fire out of his rectum due to said probe, and the boys eventually get out of school and it becomes more and more evident that Cartman indeed does have a probe. Here's one of the first examples of Kyle's lack of empathy. He flat out rips the head off of Kenny just to prove a point to Cartman that he's dead. No remorse or anything about his friend being dead, just rips the head straight off. Leanne offers powdered donut pancakes and assuages Cartman's insecurity by saying that he's big bone. Even when Cartman refuses, she enables his bad habits. And especially going back to the big bone thing, Cartman has a natural inclination to believe his mother over most things. Cartman doesn't want to see the other boys because he knows that they will rope him into something that he doesn't want to do, so he asks his mom to attest to his absence if they show up. Winnie suggests that they should go get Cartman and they follow suit. Leanne brings the boys in despite Cartman asking her not to. They then proceed to get Cartman to come with them. Stan and Kyle tie him to a tree to use as bait and even taunt him while doing so. Eventually, a large satellite protrudes out of him and he is still in denial. Kyle gives a really nice speech just to let his anger win out when they don't listen. When Cartman is abducted again, they do nothing to help or stop it. So here are the large takeaways from this episode. Within this episode, Cartman is both tortured, bullied, harassed, and physically assaulted. His mother both enables his bad habits and neglects him, which will be elaborated on later. And one of the first things to take from the group dynamics is that Cartman is meant to be the outlier of the group. That is very evident from the first episode. Season 1, Episode 2, Volcano. The episode begins with the boys and Stan's uncle Jimbo going on a hunting trip. Despite them clearly not liking Cartman, he's invited on the trip anyways. After Leanne tries to give him an affectionate send-off, Cartman is not interested in returning her affection. More than likely, he knows that he's going to be teased, which he is. Kyle leads it off, which has one of the first implications of Leanne's promiscuity. After arriving at the mountains, Jimbo gives each of the boys a gun. As Jimbo begins to explain that Democrats have passed a lot of laws preventing hunting unless you're in immediate danger, ergo why, before they shoot something, they yell, "Look, it's coming!" Cartman says, "Democrats piss me off." Cartman, like most children, are incredibly impressionable and swiftly picks up on whatever the adults and or by extent television, whatever they say around him. As they begin to hunt, Stan is the only one disturbed by the shootings and or the huntings. Cartman spouts off more jargon from the Vietnamese War, which, once again, he's not in the damn Vietnamese War. When it comes time for Stan to shoot the bunny, he says that he doesn't want to, prompting Jimbo to say that he's a pansy. When Cartman retorts back with similar rhetoric, they begin threatening to shoot each other. It's also kind of interesting that he doesn't want to shoot an animal, but is interested in shooting Cartman. Randy, who at the time we don't know is Stan's dad, but who's a geologist, sees that the volcano is becoming active and knows that trouble is brewing. Due to poor decisions, Ned is now on fire, and with Cartman's lack of empathy, he decides to roast wieners over him. Also, adults offer children alcohol, which is bad. Cartman proceeds to tell a scary story that initially starts off frightening but ends up falling flat. They proceed to make fun of him. Cartman runs off dressed as Scuzzlebutt with the intentions to scare them. First off, the adults don't even know or even acknowledge that Cartman is missing, and they leave both Stan and Kyle alone just to go out with Kenny in the middle of a boat, so irresponsible all the way around. When Stan begins to vent his feelings as to why he thinks his uncle likes him less compared to Kenny, Kyle just farts. What a great friend. After more shenanigans, they attempt to kill Cartman, who they think is Scuzzlebutt. Here are some major takeaways from this episode. This is the first showcase of Leanne's potential promiscuity, and most of the teasing in this episode is at Cartman's expense. So, once again, setting up those dynamics. Another takeaway is that Cartman is incredibly impressionable, and he basically, whatever the adults around him say, he'll take in. Or at least more so, the negative thoughts that they seem to project, he intakes that a lot more compared to anything else positive. But once again, that's a reflection of their environment. So, keep those things in mind. Season 1, Episode 3, Weight Gain 4,000. Cartman wins a writing competition, and while it's fairly evident that he doesn't even know what he wrote about, the environment is more so what I want to focus on here. Wendy immediately assumes that she is going to win, and obviously going back based on the first episode, she's the smart one, so duh. But when Cartman wins instead of her, what's interesting is her reaction. Now, granted, I think we're fairly aware that Cartman should not have won that, but I beg to differ. If it was Kyle, Stan, Token, or anyone of any sort of wit or resolve, would she still feel the same way? This episode doesn't have much depth to it, so I'll go ahead and play the tape forward. Wendy devotes the entire episode to finding out whether or not Cartman really won or if he cheated. Yes, he did cheat. He actually plagiarized Walden by Henry David Thoreau and just scratched his name out. But if his own teacher and a council of judges could not figure that out with their own merit, that's not really Cartman's fault. They're just stupid, equally so as well. I mean, literally, he scratched his name out and just... not the point. But if this was a competition worthy of merit and the judges themselves couldn't figure out that the work was plagiarized, is that really a competition of merit that you should be worried about? No. It's just the fact that Cartman, quote unquote, got one over on her. Going into my next point, it is proven through episodes, and there's a reason why I'm going into these like smaller episodes for all the details. It is proving time and time again, at least, that the entire environment of South Park and his peers, the adults around him, are against him. Doesn't matter if they gain anything, if they lose anything. If Cartman loses, or whatever he loses to his extent, that's all that really matters. Episode 8, Starvin' Marvin. The episode begins with Leanne asking the boys if they want cheesy poofs, following Cartman to yell at her and to go retrieve them. A charity commercial plays asking for donations to help children in Africa. What they are more so interested in is getting a Takeo digital sports watch that comes as a free gift. As they call each other vulgar names, Cartman calls him a vas deferens. Testicles? At school the next day, the class is asked by Mr. Garrison to bring in canned food so that they can give to those less fortunate. In typical Cartman fashion, he makes a selfish statement saying that he's not bringing in food for poor people and screw them. While Wendy argues with Cartman about the ethics of giving, she says something questionable. This is the one time a year you're supposed to care about the people who can't eat. You're supposed to care year-round. Cartman retorts with, "Isn't it enough that I pay taxes? What about the poorhouses that I pay for?" In this scene, even though they are essentially just two 8-year-olds arguing, Wendy speaks with assuredness, and yes, while these are her own beliefs, it's kind of implied that they've been reinforced at home. Cartman's talking points come from another adult, if not just television or whatever he hears around him. He parrots the beliefs of someone own and, once again, impressionable. When the boys get back to Cartman's house, instead of a digital sports watch, they find a malnourished Ethiopian child. Starvin' Marvin. Despite Cartman just saying that he doesn't want to help others, he asks his mom if he can take in the starving child. They then make a schedule as to who can keep Marvin, and we see Cartman begin to punch down on Kenny for being poor. The other boys agree with him. When they go to a buffet later that evening for dinner, Cartman makes a joke that for $6.99 they can all come to eat, but Kenny's family does not because $6.99 to them is like a year's worth of income. Everyone in the scene laughs, but it's slightly more terrible considering the previous scene. None of the adults in the scene correct his behavior because it is reinforced that making fun of Kenny's family is okay because they're poor. So, once again, bad habits are being reinforced. Cartman's statements are also now validated because now, for 2 times in a row, he gets laughs and validation from making fun of Kenny's family. Making fun of Kenny's family means he's not a target for being fat or many other things. So, let's proceed. In an odd way in this scene, I think Cartman really tried to accommodate starving Marvin in the best way he knew how with sharing of food, despite him being disgusted with his greed and selfishness. The next day at school, only a few cans of creamed corn have been donated to Kenny's family. Despite insisting that they should share, the town isn't exactly very giving themselves. While the boys show off Marvin for show and tell, Mr. Garrison is the only adult so far that recognizes a mistake has been made. The other kids say that they want one as well. When the boys are in the principal's office, Principal Victoria begins to scold them that they cannot care for a child. They argue back that on Thanksgiving, you're supposed to care. The ethics that she begins to preach are contradictory and hollow, and even the boys can recognize that. When they ask why he can't stay, she just says he can't. When they ask why they can't take care of him, she says they can't, prompting Kyle to say, well, you take care of him. More hollow talking points of, I can't, I'm busy, but I send my $5. The morals of the adults around them are incredibly morally bankrupt. And you see the impression that this leaves on Cartman because what he says immediately afterwards is, oh well, back to the poor country with you. You better watch what you say, Cartman. You might be poor and hungry someday. Government agents come for Marvin and instead they take Cartman. While Marvin is sitting on the couch watching television, the same commercial comes on with Cartman in it, extremely distressed, especially considering he's been kidnapped. And the most disturbing part is Leanne hasn't even noticed that he's been missing. It seems as long as Cartman is pacified, she doesn't really pay attention to him. Even Stan, Kyle, and Kenny take notice that Cartman is missing before his own mother. Despite it being a little obvious that he doesn't belong there, the Red Cross doesn't want to help him get home. Cartman begins to beg God for forgiveness and insists that he'll be less mocking, inconsiderate, and be more kind. After finding a plethora of food in Sally Struthers, they get into a petty argument before Cartman alerts the other Ethiopians. Marvin chooses to leave and go back to Ethiopia because even he can acknowledge the environment of South Park is completely unstable. So here are the takeaways from this episode. Cartman is more than aware that he should be more empathetic and kind to other people, but his environment does not support that type of behavior. Why is Wendy and Stan more empathetic? Well, that comes down a little bit more so, I think, to their own moral compass and, once again, slightly better adult figures in their lives. However, for Cartman specifically, any form of kindness is seen as a weakness and therefore, and by proxy, bites him in the ass every single time. Rolling into the big one, Season 1, Episode 13, Cartman's mom is a dirty slut. The episode begins with Stan, Kyle, and Kenny wondering and looking for Cartman, seeing as he has been missing from school for several days. Kyle calls Cartman fat ass to his mom and she does nothing to correct him. They go to the backyard to find Cartman and see that he's playing pretend. In playing pretend, majority of the stuffed animals see him as cool, smart, strong, and that everyone likes him. When Stan, Kenny, and Kyle sees this, Kyle is the first one to jump at making fun of him. To be frank, he is incredibly eager to do so. Only when Stan stops him and says that Cartman needs help, that is the only reason he halts. Now, I know the politics and most of the stuff from 1997 to 2023 varies vastly different, but he's just a little boy playing pretend. There is nothing insane about what he's doing. I think it's a testament to his psyche. I think that what he is doing explains more so the way he feels, and he's projecting it onto his stuffed animals, but what children don't, whether it's dolls, action figures, plushies, there's nothing wrong with what he's doing. They go to Mr. Mackey saying that something's wrong with Cartman, and he says, oh well, there's a newsflash, followed with the imagery of dads are dandy, and if you don't have a dad, you're a bastard. As we go back to Cartman playing pretend, he keeps complimenting himself to soothe his own ego, which makes sense when he feels like no one likes him. Even within his own fantasy, reality slips through as Clyde Frog says, "I think you're a big fat piece of crap," bringing an outcry of anger from Cartman. This could be a stretch, but follow along with me. There are 4 characters sitting at Cartman's tea party. Take note of the shape of his figures. 3 rounded heads and 1 rectangle-like shape. The characters are representative of Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny. While Cartman is an omnipresent/omniscient figure at this tea party, what he really wants is the people around him, and more specifically the characters of Stan, Kyle, Kenny, represented through these dolls, to think he's cool and to give him admiration and respect. What 8-year-old or what person in general doesn't want that? But however, he's never going to get that. Not here. In the next scene, Cartman and his mom are eating dinner, and he asks his mom where his dad is and why he doesn't have one. Leanne begins to weave a tale about how she met his father at the drunken barn dance, which is nothing more than a tale to soothe Cartman and get him basically to hush up and quiet down about the whole thing. However, Cartman now believes that his father is Native American. He believes that he's Native American and is dressing and acting in such a way. Within the B plot of the story, the other 3 boys are going to take the film with Cartman on it. By the way, they've been filming him while he had his tea party, and submit it to America's Funniest Home Videos. Cartman now arrives to the reservation, and he is told by Chief Running Water that his mother is a slut. Notice when Cartman's mother is insulted, on her behalf, he gets offended. We never see her become offended on his behalf ever throughout the series. Well, at least not within the first half of the series. Chief Running Waters begins to recount his evening spent with her, just to conclude that he never went that far with her. Leanne meets Chef within the flashback, and now Cartman believes that he is half black. Now that he's talking, with a fake ass accent, he rejects the thought of him being Native American. Once again, this entire episode does nothing more than prove that he's incredibly impressionable. Cartman goes to Chef's house with his decorative presentation, and Chef basically tells him to stop. While there, he tells Chef that he's his dad, and Chef quickly explains why he can't be his father. In this moment, he's more disappointed that Chef isn't his dad compared to Chief Running Waters. Take note of this, I'll bring it up later. Through a song, Chef explains intercourse. And through the night, or through his account, we see that the last person Leanne was with would be Mr. Garrison, which leaves Cartman markedly upset. Unbeknownst to Cartman, he is being shown on America's Funniest Home Video, and Stan and Kyle show no remorse that he's being humiliated on national television. When Sharon and Randy come in to basically try to comfort the boys that Kenny's dead, do they really care? No. There's one ice cream. No empathy. At a bar, Mr. Garrison is confronted by Cartman about being his dad, and Mr. Garrison drops the hardest bomb on Cartman regarding his mom. That she's very promiscuous / sexually active woman, and his dad basically could be anyone. Cartman is now upset that he'll never know his father. Dr. Mephisto pipes up and basically says that there's a way to find out who his father is for a nominal fee of $3,000. When Cartman says that he doesn't have $3,000, Mephisto just says never mind. Cartman, now despondent, confides in Stan and Kyle that the only way he can find out who his father is with $3,000. Stan and Kyle call her a whore, and while Cartman laments that he's willing to work in a sweatshop just to earn the money, says he wants to go play in his backyard for a while. So let's pause here and address something that I'm trying to get at all along. Cartman, from at least season 7 and up, is not the same Cartman from at least season 5 backwards. Eric Cartman is a little boy missing the love from another parent. Leanne's efforts to make up for it in gifts and overindulgence seem to pacify Cartman. However, she is incredibly neglectful and not very present. The only place that Cartman feels safe is in his backyard, playing pretend, basically in his own imaginary world where he feels safe. Kyle and Stan offer to help Cartman with their share of the money from exploiting him, and we see him perk up a lot. When Cartman sees that he's been filmed secretly, he's impossibly shocked, followed swiftly by anger. Notice compared to Kyle, he doesn't physically assault him, and he would be 110% within the right to do so. Even when they lose and win the runner-up money, I guess they do the right thing and give Eric the money. Back at Mephisto's lab, he finds a select few who could be his father, and Stan says, "I always knew Cartman's mom was a slut, but goddamn." I'm gonna go ahead and spoil the ending for you here. Cartman's mother is intersex, which I think is a cop-out / screw you, mostly due to the fact that I believe Matt and Trey think it's more funny that Cartman doesn't have a dad. You know, because suffering. So here are your takeaways from this episode. Cartman has been humiliated, disappointed, embarrassed, angered, disrespected. The lot of it. Wipe your mind of the Eric Cartman that we know of currently. Within the context of the season, sure, Eric is fairly bratty, disrespectful, insensitive, and incredibly misinformed of the way the world works. However, a lot of 8-year-olds are like this, and with proper care, guidance, love, and affection, you can grow up to be a well-adjusted adult. It is incredibly telling within this episode that whatever he feels like he's lacking, he can find it in a father figure, just to be told no. And with that knowledge, let's proceed to season 2. Another thing, just gonna bring this up, even though I said we were going on to season 2, there's gonna be a couple of honorable mentions, not necessarily because anything substantial happens in the episode. It's just, I think minor details are what builds up to a character over time, and for certain episodes, I think they're important to acknowledge. So, here we go. Season 1 honorable mentions. Season 1, episode 12, Mecha Streisand. Cartman punches down on Pip, fakes playing a game with him just to kick him in the nuts. He's more than aware that Pip is below him socially, and so he harps on that and figures he can do whatever he wants to him. What Cartman does to Pip, Kyle does to Cartman, and what Cartman does to Pip, we will see that he'll eventually do this stuff to Butters. Important, keep that in mind for later. More physical torture in this episode. Season 1, episode 10. I barely remember this episode, but this is slightly important. This is one of the first times I think we see Cartman physically assault Kyle. During a birthday party for Cartman, the specific gift that he wants gains you access to his party, basically. When Kyle doesn't get him the specific action doll that he wants, Cartman tackles him to the ground and screams that he hates him and he wants him to die. Very dramatic. Granted, there is no excuse for physical violence, and in an overcomplicated way, we could say that Cartman associates gifts with love and attention, and by not getting what he wants, this is an act of hate. Also, I think we can somewhat agree that Cartman desperately wants Kyle's attention. It's fairly evident in later seasons that Cartman's motivations mostly lie with getting under Kyle's skin, and he'll do that by any means possible. Season 2. Season 2, episode 13, Cow Days. This episode starts off with a couple that kind of doesn't matter, but they win a trip to South Park for Cow Days. God bless their hearts. Now at the fair, Kyle and Stan suggest that they should try to win Terrence and Phillip dolls. Cartman is the first to fork over money for the stall. The game at hand is simply to throw balls into a target. After failing twice, Kyle berates him and takes over for the last throw. While he does hit the target, the ball does not make it into the goal. Kyle then demands for Cartman to give him more money. With not enough left, he goes to his mom to ask for more money. He specifically asked for $17, expecting Cartman to give him his other $3. It's not implied, but I do think he's expecting Cartman to give him the other $3. He's very demanding and arrogant. That's the important part. Kyle says we have $15 between us, and that's 9 balls to throw. Keep note of this, but he asks his mother for 17, presumably to match Cartman's 3. So where's this extra 5 going? Did he give it back to Cartman? They come across a Chamber of Farts rides, and Cartman convinces them to go on. They have now lost about $4. After going on said ride, Cartman is the only one to have enjoyed it. He then goads them into another ride, which is basically just standing in a long line. Cartman then buys them a picture of them in the line ride and hands over money. After arriving back at the original Terrence and Phillip stall, there is now only $3 left. Kyle proceeds to attack him, and Cartman even apologizes for his mistake. Now, the whole basis of this video is to overcomplicate things, but objectively speaking, Cartman just wanted to spend time with his friends and have a nice picture of them all together. Now, granted, if I was his friend, would I have been pissed that you wasted all our damn money on rides that made no sense? And a picture? Sure, but that's not enough to physically assault someone. Remember, Cartman put his own money up first before anyone else. And with no return as well. You could say he just wanted to spend time with his friends, and basically his own social group rejects him time and time and time again. The carny who runs the ride says that he will take food stamps, and so Cartman asks basically for Kenny to hand over his food stamps, and he says no. When Kyle inevitably fails again, he calls shenanigans on the whole affair and that the game is rigged. After swapping out the balls, it's clear that the carny is a con man, and they're not getting these dolls. When Kyle sees a poster offering $5,000 to win a bull riding contest, he immediately suggests that Cartman has to. Cartman protests, leading Kyle to once again resort to physical violence and verbal abuse. After finding a bull riding machine for Cartman to practice on, he's thrown violently from the bull into a glass arcade machine. Are they worried for him? No. They tell him he has to get back on the bull with broken glass shards in his back. Now with Cartman on a real bull, yet an old and decrepit one, Kyle intentionally angers it so it'll thrash around. Cartman is thrown from said bull and now has aphasia. Still, not 1 ounce of sympathy. Cartman now believes that he is a Vietnamese prostitute. Cartman disappears at the fair and is found by the bull riding ring offering accountant services. Stan is the only one who has second thoughts about forcing Cartman to do any of this. Realizing that the bull might kill Cartman, does Kyle try to help? Nope. No, he does not. He coerces Kenny to do it, which he promptly says no, but then dies anyway. Cartman wins the match, and they go back to the Terrence and Phillip doll stall and exchange the $5,000 for the doll. Kyle is not great with math either. Shenanigans is declared and chaos ensues. By the end of the video, Cartman has his memory back with no clue to what has occurred. And even after all that, they don't even give him a doll. Takeaways from this episode. Kyle is actually quite awful. Terrible friend. I know we tend to think of Kyle positively in the later seasons because he is basically the polar opposite of Cartman, or at least in the terms of this show, they are the ones who oppose each other, or the only one who will right the wrongs of Cartman is Kyle. However, Kyle is really awful to Cartman with no provocation. It's very clear in their dynamics that Cartman is meant to be a pushover to the group with no pushback that they ever expected. They have no regard for his safety or concern about him. Season 2, Episode 18, Prehistoric Iceman. This episode begins with the 4 boys watching what is obviously Steve Irwin, rest in peace. When Steve comes across an alligator, he attempts to jam his finger up his butt, tackling it. The boys become excited, and while, yes, this is Eric's house, it is very apparent that he's the one who suggested that they watch this. As the show ends, they proceed to go and look for crocodiles. After Cartman makes a bit of an annoying remark, Kyle insults him, and Cartman wishes to kick him in the balls. Kyle falls down the mountain and into a hole. Stan becomes angry at Cartman and saying that he's killed Kyle. Cartman replies with, well, he shouldn't have called me fat. Stan retorts with, well, that's like calling the sky blue. Cartman responds again, well, screw him, he's dead, let's go look for crocodiles. Remember, in the previous episode I just stated, they've tried to kill him at literally every turn with no concern for his well-being, so why all of a sudden would Cartman turn around and show care and concern for Kyle when he's been left for dead several times by now? Also, the hole looks like a butt, if you're wondering. After a barrage of insults from Kyle to Cartman, Stan decides that he's going to go down to get Kyle. After descending the cave, Stan and Kyle find a frozen man and begin to deliberate on what to do with him. Stan and Kyle begin to argue in another sidebar. I love that Cartman is just chugging along. The fight is along the basis of who is the one that discovered the caveman. The boys show up in town with the man frozen in a block of ice and ask the adults there for an award. Dr. Mephisto then takes the man for experiments and says while he can't offer a reward, they can name him. Before Stan can, Kyle blurts out Steve, and so the frozen man is named such. Fast forwarding to a news section, Kyle is the one doing the interview while Stan tries to drown him out. Another thing of notice, Kyle is an incredibly selfish character. I think we kind of don't think about the ethics of half of the stuff he does, but I would argue he's just as selfish as Cartman. I'll elaborate even more so on this going forward, but if you ever pay attention, Kyle will put his own self-interest above everyone else, and that is, like, pretty consistent throughout the series. Also, without a shadow of a doubt, Stan found that frozen man. He found that frozen man first. With Steve/Gorak now unfrozen, they wish for one of the children to communicate with him. While they are still bickering, Kyle says that Stan is being a dick, and Kyle is 110% in the wrong here. Barbary asks for a volunteer to go to Dr. Mephisto's lab, and Kyle raises his hand first. Stan once again rebuttals that he found him first. Cartman even announces that he's never seen them fight like this. After an arbitrary game to decide who can go, they all make their way over there regardless, so there was no point of the game. Stan and then the unfrozen man have a basic conversation, and he inevitably flips out after finding out it's now 1999. He's sedated, and Kyle now blames Stan for freaking him out. Just to upset the other, they both claim that Cartman is now their best friend, and that they want nothing to do with each other. Cartman takes great joy in this. For someone who is constantly insulted by Stan and Kyle, he seems incredibly eager and willing to be their best friend. But if it's not clear to you now, Cartman is not their friend. They don't really consider him a friend. He is just a prop and a punching bag to them. So these statements aren't made to benefit Cartman, just despite the former. And the incredibly sad part is, Cartman is so desperate to be their friend that the circumstances as to why they're suddenly insisting that Cartman is their best friend, that doesn't matter to him. He just wants to belong. Government agents come to see Steve, and now he's being held captive in a 1996 simulation, or just a room with old decor. Now that Steve is on display, people/the boys come to visit him, and Kyle and Stan are still arguing. Despite it being very obvious that they are talking to each other, they claim that they are talking to Cartman, who suddenly says, "Damn, I'm pretty cool all of a sudden." No. Kyle and Stan begin to argue with the government agents that keeping Steve in the state isn't right and that he should be freed. Kyle and Stan independently decide that they've come to free Steve. While bickering, one of them opens the door, and now Steve is free. Fast forwarding a bit, it becomes very obvious that Stan doesn't want Cartman as a friend. To be honest, fighting and bickering among children, especially like 8-year-old children, that's pretty normal. However, the only normal person in the scenario is just Cartman, to be fair. He just wants to play crocodile or crocodile hunting with his friends, and they are engaging in everything but that. Fast forwarding a bit again, the government agents and Steve Irwin are now looking for Gorak, whose real name is Larry, with Cartman now tagging along. More of Cartman being impressionable, he follows directly what Steve Irwin does because he believes that that is cool. After more shenanigans, Larry goes to Des Moines, and Stan and Kyle are now friends again. Kyle then admits, after the entire episode of acting like this, that he was being a dick and that Stan indeed found Gorak or Steve. So what the hell is the point of doing all that for, if you know damn well you're in the wrong? The episode ends with both of them denouncing Cartman as best friend and saying that he sucks. Why did I bring this up? Mostly just a few more examples of Kyle's selfish behavior, more so. It's pretty consistent once you kind of see the way he acts a lot of the times, but if you don't think about it independently, you'll never put these pieces together. Season 3, there aren't a lot of in-depth episodes that I really want to go into. Granted, you can find stuff if you go into these episodes with the mindset, and or at least the things that I'm talking about here. However, I do think there's a lot of little details, so Season 3 is mostly, or only, honorable mentions, and so, here we go. Season 3, Episode 2, Spontaneous Combustion. To my recollection, this is the first season where we see Cartman begin to insult Kyle for being Jewish, starting with Episode 1 of the season. Now, anti-Semitism isn't accepted over here, it's not tolerated, and it's sure as shit not welcomed. However, for a child like Cartman, where in his environment everything flies, no one ever corrects any bad behavior, and there certainly isn't an adult in his life who's willing to correct his behavior, if that is an insult that gets under Kyle's skin, and we see consistently it works every single time, he's gonna keep doing it. This is the first insult we see Cartman say to Kyle that works and gets under his skin, so therefore that's his go-to every single time. Once again, being Jewish is not an insult. That is not what I'm implying over here. So there's more torture in this episode. Kyle and Stan literally try to crucify him. This is definitely now the umpteenth time that they've tried to kill him. Leanne at some point asks Kyle and Stan where Cartman has been, and while they say that they've been caring for him, she never really puts any actual effort into looking for her son. Here is my biggest takeaway from this episode, though. When Cartman is on the cross and is hallucinating probably from the lack of food, dehydration, and being out in the cold, he imagines that Chef comes to save him. Chef is Chef is the most pivotal and important adult figure that the boys have, and out of every adult possible, he imagines that Chef comes to save him, which says a lot. Going back to the previous season where Cartman thought that Chef was his dad, it makes it even more sad, or at least more disappointing, that Cartman, he probably already deep down knew that Chef wasn't his dad, but it says a lot more, and it speaks more to the disappointment that he feels, because Chef is probably the only reliable adult in his life, unfortunately. And if we fast forward even more to the season and or episode where Chef dies, we never see Cartman have that type of disappointment or sadness with anyone else. So, just a testament to that. Season 3, Episode 7, Cat Orgy. Takeaways from this episode. We see Cartman being impressionable again, dressing up as Will Smith from the movie Wild Wild West. Arguably, once again, Cartman wants to be seen as someone who is important and cool. He drew a picture of his mom on the fridge. That's so cool. That's cute. It's cool. The storyline of this episode, which also trails into a nice little trilogy, the main four's parents, excluding Kenny, are all planning to attend a party. So in their cases, or at least Stan, Kyle, and Kenny, are left in reliable places where they should be safe. Kenny and Kyle go to a Jewish-based camp. Stan is in the basement of the party that his parents are attending, and Cartman is left at home with a babysitter. So here's the thing. If Shelly is Cartman's babysitter for the night, why wouldn't Stan also be with Shelly and Cartman? Why is Shelly single-handedly responsible for Cartman's well-being, but not Stan? Well, Shelly is incredibly violent, and we see that consistently throughout the series with how she treats her little brother. If Randy and Sharon don't trust Stan with Shelly, why the hell is she entrusted with Cartman's well-being? And here is the picture that I've been trying to paint, at least when it comes down to Leanne. Leanne, as a mother in the early seasons, is incredibly neglectful and a selfish mother, to put it bluntly. Leanne will put her wants and needs above Cartman's well-being, and she does this pretty consistently. Within the episode, we see both Shelly and her boyfriend physically abuse Cartman. Even when he calls to tell her, she dismisses him and point-blank says, not really, when he asks if she believes him. She then proceeds to hang up the phone. Now, I've been a child before, and I can understand a parent not necessarily immediately believing a child, especially a child like Cartman, who I think we can all agree will tell little lies here and there to get his way. That I will give you that. However, leading up to this, we really haven't seen him play wolf, so to speak. Also, with the evidence from spontaneous combustion, and there will be more evidence later, we see that when he is literally left in the middle of nowhere, in the cold, on a cross, she doesn't care to look for him or do anything of the sort. So, consistently speaking, Leanne will do the bare minimum to care for Cartman, and most of her care seems to come in the form of gifts and or food. Earlier within the episode, when Cartman earnestly believes from Shelly that she's dead, we see a certain type of innocence and naivete that is not seen in Cartman in later seasons. Cartman places faith and belief in his mom to be in his corner, and he is frequently let down. He even believes that the cat will take the pictures to his mom, and that's what's going to save him. That's in line with an 8-year-old, to be honest. But here's the most important thing from this episode. By the end, when we see Shelly on the couch in tears after the old-ass guy that she was with decides to leave her when she, quote-unquote, won't put out, Cartman decides to comfort her and helps her plot revenge. Even when she abused him for the majority of the night, Eric Cartman, with no benefit to himself, decides to help Shelly pro bono. When do we ever see him do that ever again? We don't. It is incredibly unprecedented for us to ever see Cartman do something like this again. That's another thing I also wish to harp on. I've said this multiple times, but my point is, and especially with Cartman being a potentially or more so a sympathetic character in general. If he wasn't in the environment of South Park where he could potentially grow and or be a better person, Cartman's potential lies in that there is a little bit of goodness in him. Not saying he doesn't have flaws. What character in any story or real life or not doesn't have flaws? However, if his environment didn't shape him to be what he was, he can go on to be a good person. Keep that in mind. We'll come back to that. The revenge plays out well. However, when Leanne gets home, she is too drunk to care for her son, and so basically passes out, and the house is a mess, and there's cats everywhere. Not the point. Cartman flat out states that his mother is a lush, and that for them, she won't know any of this happened. Which not only means that this is fairly normal for him, it also means that this is not the first time she has come home in a stupor like this and didn't even bother to check on him. Season 3, Episode 11, Chin Pokemon. Nothing of extreme note within this episode, except it pertains to Kyle. Kyle flat out states to his mother that if you are singled out, you are bullied. Meaning, he is fully aware of his actions and the way he treats Cartman, and therefore other people by proxy. This is also one of the few episodes where we see Cartman is able to tease Kyle for not being in on a trend. How long that lasts, or how much it stays on trend, not very long. Season 3, Episode 14, The Red Badge of Gayness. Nothing extremely major here, but we begin to see Cartman become more clever, willing to outwit Stan and Kyle just to prove a point. Cartman is able to convince a bunch of grown men to throw a Civil War reenactment and almost trigger another Civil War. So this is one of the first times where we're able to see him put his emotions aside and become cunning, have wit, and manipulate everyone in the situation into his own favor. Once again, these are things that are innately within Cartman, or at least the skills he's learned to pick up over time. Even in this episode where Cartman technically wins, Stan and Kyle renege. They tried to pull an Uno reverse card on Cartman by saying that they have actually won. Granted, no one really wins in this episode, but they don't give him his credit for outsmarting them for once. Season 4, Episode 5, Cartman joins Nambla. The episode begins with the quartet playing a very odd board game which clearly involves early 2000s politics and conspiracy theories. Kenny's parents come in and announce that they wish to have another child, leading Cartman to go on a very conservative rant about poor people having kids and that he has to pay for it out of his taxes. Stan immediately says, "You're 8, what taxes?" Leading Cartman out of his own self-inflated ego to claim that he needs more mature friends and that he has outgrown the rest of them. I say self-inflated ego because at this point his self-worth is viewed in parallel to the others. At this point, if he doesn't think highly of himself, no one else will. Is that necessarily a problem? No. Is his approach incredibly misguided? Yes. He also, literally says he's above them. You're nya, and you're more like nya, and I'm nya. At this point, it's not even his subconscious that he's not aware of. He's consciously aware that they more than likely don't like him, and that's why they treat him this way. Cartman then proceeds to go online to find more mature men. While this is played up for laughs, our modern definition of what is happening is literal grooming. Innocently, he believes these men want to be his friends. He agrees to meet a predator in a diner, and as he's venting to the stranger, it's apparent the disconnect he feels with his peers and environment. Once again, Cartman is being taken advantage of by the figures or the authority figures that he sees in his life. The FBI come and take him away, and he is left befuddled. Back at his computer, he tries to reach out to another grown man again. Meeting someone else down at the pier, he finds Mr. Garrison. Cartman readily hands over his trust to Mr. Garrison because obviously that's his teacher, but to us the viewers, that's incredibly worrisome. Because you as a teacher should not be doing this at all. So once again, he has another adult figure who he actually technically does know this time around, let him down once again. While Mr. Garrison is shocked and appalled at seeing Eric is under the assumption that he wants to be friends with him. After Mr. Garrison is taken away, Cartman believes Stan and Kyle are behind this and seek them out. Considering that in every other circumstance this has been true, I'm not surprised that he has reached this conclusion. Kyle and Stan are outside a clinic watching elderly people who are on dialysis. Fun fact in the scene, dialysis is spelled wrong. Keep this in mind. Kyle and Stan are outside of a dialysis facility for elderly people, making fun of them and making faces at them. This is incredibly important for the next section. I cannot stress that enough. Keep this in mind. Kyle initiates and Stan follows his lead. Cartman approaches them with anger and accusations, which they deny, leading him to storm off more determined than before. In the next scene, we see a group of men storm the police station demanding for the sexual predator's release. So now a group named NAMBLA are within the borders of South Park. In a new scene, Cartman asks for Dr. Mephisto's help to meet new friends, or more specifically, new older male friends. He says that he is in a group called NAMBLA and he thinks that he'll fit right in. Spoilers, it's a different NAMBLA. At a meeting for NAMBLA, Cartman walks in seeking companionship, and to put it bluntly, one could even say he's looking for a father figure in these men, which is incredibly unfortunate because he has walked into the hands of literal predators. Once again, where in the hell is Leanne? After the meeting, Cartman comes to gloat in Stan and Kyle's faces, instilling uncertainty within Stan and Kyle. During an inappropriate photo shoot, they ask Eric to invite more little boys to their meeting. He believes this is an opportunity to exclude Kyle and Stan, meanwhile he's just being used again. He comes to Stan and Kyle to gloat again. Now with the upper hand, Cartman excludes them, which only prompts the duo to get into the party to spite him. While every little boy is at the town meeting, they begin to become tipped off that something is off here. The other NAMBLA, which is the North American Marlon Brando lookalikes, which was raided by the FBI, have now joined in the fight to stop the predators that are in their town. Back at the hotel, all of the boys are now very aware of the intentions of these men, and after a Looney Tune, Scooby-Doo-esque chase sequence, the boys decide, since Cartman got everyone into the situation, he needs to figure a way out. Cartman insists that someone has to take one for the team, and he nominates Butters. This is a major theme being set up, so take note. Once again, we're ignoring the B-plot, but the boys are able to get out safely. So here's what we can take away from this episode. Cartman desires friendship, respect, admiration, and to be seen. At this point, he's at least somewhat consciously aware that he's not going to be able to get those things out of his friend group, and that he needs to seek it out from somewhere else. However, as resourceful and cunning that Cartman can be, he is incredibly vulnerable at this point in the series because he's actively seeking out, to put it bluntly, some form of love from someone, which actively will put a little boy in harm's way. So what happens to someone who seeks out love, whether it be romantic or platonic, from every corner that you can find it, and you're rejected at every turn? One becomes resentful, angry, and jaded. Season 4, Episode 6, Cherokee Hair Tampons. The episode begins with a substitute teacher leading the class, which is a great continuity from the previous episode. It's announced that Kyle is out sick, and that the class needs to make him a get well card. Stan says he's faking. But as the class gets up to work with the supplies, Eric Cartman, in the same tone as Stan, says he's faking. When the sub says that Cartman needs to get up and help the class with the get well card, Cartman retorts with, I don't want Kyle to get well. I hate Kyle. Arguably, we do know all the stuff that I've been presenting that Kyle has done to him from the past, but he could also not want Kyle to come back due to the fact alone that he can be closer with Stan and Kenny with Kyle not being around. Seeing as they're kind of getting along in this little segment makes sense. With the decorations, they dress up Butters as the card. Now at Kyle's house, it's clearly apparent that he is incredibly sick. So remember what I just said from the previous segment and or episode, that Kyle was standing outside making fun of the elderly on dialysis machines? Well, guess whose liver's shutting down in this episode? So, to go along with that, we are more than aware now that there are certain creators in this universe who are more than willing to punish people for certain actions. I'll elaborate on this more later, but keep that in mind. Butters comes into the room with a song and dance about them all hoping that he will get better, and Kyle isn't responsive at all. We're going to fast forward a bit here, but Sharon and Sheila have decided to heal Kyle through holistic measures, and Stan independently decides to see a licensed doctor. The doctor tells Stan that he needs a kidney transplant, and while Stan is more than willing to give up a kidney to help Kyle, he is not a match. Obviously, for plot reasons, who can match him is Eric Cartman. Kenny and Cartman are playing with toys when Stan enters with a sick Kyle. Remember when I said that some of Cartman's more insensitive rants probably comes from an adult figure? Well, Leanne flat out tells him, don't get too close to Kyle, he might have the AIDS. Stan tries to appeal to Cartman's empathetic side to no avail. When Stan chides Cartman, he calls him Fat Boy. Now, the first time I watched this episode, it's easy to assume that Cartman's being selfish, and rightfully so, because no one's going to dictate to me personally to give up a kidney. However, considering that they have emotionally, physically, verbally abused him, And let's see, there's the torture. Yeah, I would not give up a kidney either. They have literally taunted him at every turn and at every facet in his life, and yet they constantly, or whenever it's more so convenient to them, they ask Cartman for favors, and at this point in the series, he's starting to at least gain power, or if there is a situation where he can have power over someone else, he'll take it. So, absolutely not. Stan even says that one of your friends is going to die. Don't you see how serious this is? Kenny, through his own little muttering, says, not that fucking serious. Because they don't even care when he dies. So how can you make a request like that and they don't care half of the time what happens to Kenny either? This is one of the first and also continuous statements where we see that Cartman says in exchange for something he wants $10 million. Fair. That is also more continuity into later of the season. When Stan sits outside venting to Kenny about Kyle potentially dying, he's obviously annoyed. So hopefully I can insert this into the video seamlessly. If not, then I'm just going to get like a crudely drawn piece of paper and drawn this. So the four boys act on poles, shall I say. Like I said, hopefully somewhere there'll be a graph. So in my opinion, the group works off of empathy, apathy, moral, and or immoral. So if you've noticed in their dynamics, four things tend to happen. Four things are what pushes the group along, and I honestly think they've done this pretty seamlessly over time. Kenny seems to operate on the more moral and or empathetic side, seeing as he is more likely to be the most selfless of the group, shall I say. We see this in the South Park movie where he sacrifices himself to save everyone, and Cartman's mom is still a dirty whore. Part 2, he's willing to die just so Cartman can get answers in order to give the hospital power. He consistently is willing to help others even at the demise of himself. Stan operates on the poles of both morality and apathy. So Stan is willing to help out people as much as he, in my opinion, thinks they deserve it, which is mostly right for what I would say the average person, so that's not necessarily unnatural. We see that Stan tends to do the right thing and or fight for causes, even if he doesn't benefit from it, because he genuinely believes it's the right thing to do. We see this with the way he treats Kyle, which he, by extension, believes that he deserves the apathy, or by extension believes he deserves the empathy because they're best friends. He is willing to stand up for dogs, gay people, the whale episode, things of that nature. What Stan tends to be more so apathetic about, if it doesn't necessarily enter his sphere of caring about, he's indifferent. Cartman works on the sphere of both apathy and being immoral. Over time, we see that whereas Cartman does not care very much for others and how he treats them, as long as he benefits, it does not matter. And from this, we see both his immoral actions, which I can list a litany of things, giving Kyle AIDS, for one. Let's see. The way he treats his mother in later seasons, but that makes sense with how she has treated him by proxy. The way he treats Butters, the racism, the the racism, the anti-Semitism, the misogyny, the fat phobia, the self-hatred he has. It's a litany of things. Kyle operates off of being both immoral and incredibly empathetic, where he sees that there are certain things in this world that are wrong, and he's not wrong about them. For example, whatever opposes Cartman or whatever scheme, as long as it is something as long as it's something objectively that is bad, Kyle will fight against it, but it doesn't come from a place of true altruism, if that makes any sense. Kyle does it because he has to, not because he believes in it, whereas I think Stan and Kenny actually will believe in a cause and fight for it. Kyle will do something for his own benefit, and especially only if it's to spite Cartman, which once again puts him technically on the good side, but it's not truly altruistic. Stan organizes Butters, Kenny, and Timmy to break into Cartman's house and to steal his kidney. Comedy aside, do you know how insane that is? Stan has no regard for the pain and suffering that Cartman might go through if it's just to save Kyle, that doesn't make it okay, bud. And yet, Cartman is so used to them pulling these kind of stunts at this point, he has on a kidney blocker 2000 just to prevent them from sawing into him. Cartman is extremely apathetic to Kyle potentially dying, and I think he's in the right here. After venting to Kenny again, you can hear Kenny say, "You never fucking care when I die." Storming away angry, Kenny is now dead with Stan still crying over Kyle. After more town shenanigans, Stan conducts a plan with the adults to trick Cartman into handing over his kidney. When Cartman goes to the hospital with his kidney, The doctor says that he'll put it back in for him. The doctor has him sign a release form and they prep him for surgery. With Kyle awake and Cartman awakening, he's informed that it was all a trick. His mother undid the kidney blocker, put ketchup and a false organ in his bed to deceive him. Leanne says, "Isn't that funny, sweetie?" Cartman is now incredibly pissed. So, within one episode, Cartman is shown that the friends who torment and bully him get to triumph over him. He has no bodily autonomy, and his own mother is willing to deceive him to help the boys who harm him. Also, nitpicking here, but the doctors have Cartman sign a release form. Minors cannot legally sign contracts, so they sure as shit can't sign a release form. Whatever he signs is not legally binding unless, or obviously, Leanne went behind his back to do it. So whatever he agreed to is null and void anyways. Just to reiterate, he is surrounded by terrible people. So, for today, or at least for in this moment, I am really tired of editing, and technically speaking, this has like another hour or so to go. So, until then, this is just going to be part 1, and part 2 will be coming out roughly, give me like 2.5 weeks. I really can't stand editing. Please, someone come save me, please. So, part 2 is also when we get into the real meat and potatoes. There will also be a, I guess you could say, a mini South Park pandemic, post-pandemic review kind of squished in there, but we will round this off next time. So far, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any details, anything you would like to put in the comments, I would love to hear it. Whether you agree or disagree, you know, as long as no one's disrespectful or anything, I kind of love debates. So, I've been your local know-it-all, and now you know it. See you next time.